Welcome to Soccer Morning on NASN. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome into Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network. Here we go. NASN.TV and YouTube. I believe we're still working on those Stitcher tune-in feeds. I need to get an update. I know that there's been some concern out there in the Soccer Morning community with you Soccer Morning hooligans or Army and FC, AMFC, all of those nice suggestions for the name of our little community here. But it is Thursday. We have Champions League to talk about. And when I say that, of course, I mean because this is what we do here, not just Europe, but North America. And if you are a fan of MLS in the general sense, if you are one of the people who feel something when MLS teams play in the Champions League, whether you're a fan of that individual team or not, today is a depressing day. And we will talk about that. We will go through all of your angst. We will go through your feelings. Perhaps you're a fan of Liga MX and you listen to this show, and maybe you'd like to come in and call in and crow a little bit. Maybe we'll give you that opportunity as well. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I think that that's troubling in a lot of ways, and I'm tired of having a lot of thoughts on this. A lot of people last night after the CCL debacle for MLS teams saying things like, I'm tired of the excuses. Enough already. Go down there, play well enough to win, play well enough to get the result you need. All LA had to do in Tijuana is lose 2-1, and they'd be through. All Sporting Kansas City had to do in Mexico City against Cruz Azul was lose 2-1, and they'd be through. And neither one of them got the job done. Sporting Kansas City flamed out in spectacular fashion, 5-1. They lost to Cruz Azul last night. And I don't want to pick on Mishek Jerome. I don't want to pick on Iko Para. I really don't, but you kind of have to. You kind of feel like you need to point out these problems. Are those individual players the problem? Well, yeah, on the night they were. But more than that, sort of the scope of what MLS is able to bring in terms of player quality is the problem. And again, we'll get to all of this. And we've pointed out, again, excuses maybe, and they get old and worn out, and you feel like they don't matter anymore. You feel like they shouldn't apply. If you say an excuse, legitimate or not, enough, it loses its power. The scheduling issue loses its power. Oh, MLS teams are in the early season, and Mexican teams are not. They're almost to the playoffs in the Clausura. So what? It shouldn't make that big of a difference. The money is different. Cruz Azul is going to spend $50 million, $25 million, whatever they spend on players, and MLS teams spend, what does Sporting Kansas City spend on salaries? 7? Maybe? I don't know what their DP situation is. Less than that? 5? Not an excuse anymore because we've used it too many times. It's like you only get to use an excuse so many times before it's over, before you are no longer able to. It's got a lifespan. We've used up the lifespan. We've seen this story too many damn times. Come up with something else. And if it's anywhere short of an actual legitimate reason why MLS teams cannot get it done in Mexico, then we're going to toss it aside. And we're just going to point to the fact that MLS teams aren't good enough right now. And then we're going to turn that into a criticism of the league as a whole, the setup, the system, the coaching, the players, the salaries, the culture. It's all part of it. It is. It's all part of it. Whether we have used up the excuses or not, it's all part of it. And it's hard to have this discussion now. So it frustrates me. It's hard to have this discussion now as we see what happened with Sporting, as we see what happened with LA. And let me take the opportunity here to applaud the San Jose Earthquakes for a fantastic effort in a losing situation. Played 120 minutes of committed soccer. Were they a better team than Toluca? No, not in a million years. Did they play better football than Toluca? No, they sure didn't. In fact, Toluca's manager came out after the game and said, they tell me soccer is improving, football is improving in the United States. I don't know how. Ouch, I guess. Maybe. If we cared what he thought. as MLS fans. But the fact remains, Mexican teams, especially the ones that qualify for the Champions League, are better than their MLS opponents, especially the ones that qualify for the Champions League. And remember, and this is why it's partly amazing what San Jose was able to do last night, down potentially seven starters. Mark Watson cobbling together a lineup. The fact that the way that San Jose got into this tournament was by winning the Supporter Shield in 2012. 2012. It's 2014 right now. We are starting the 2014 season. San Jose Earthquakes got through the group stage. Now it helped that they were paired up in that round with a Montreal Impact. Made it a little bit easier to get through. So this team bears little to no resemblance to the 2012 Supporter Shield team. The man who led that team to the Supporter Shield doesn't even have his job anymore, Frank Yallop. I'm not saying that we shouldn't want MLS teams to win and we shouldn't expect MLS teams to get over this hump eventually. I don't want to make excuses. I really don't. I think they should go down and do better. I don't understand why LA got blitzed with 2 goals in the first 10 minutes. I don't understand why Sporting Kansas City did the same thing, essentially. Gave them a goal in the 3rd minute, Sporting Kansas City last night. If there's ever a time to sort of lock it in, it's in the first 5 minutes in Mexico. What the? Sporting. And Vermees didn't start calling. Don't know why. I still don't know why. I don't know. We're all frustrated as MLS fans. We're all frustrated. What do we do? Where do we go with this? How can we acknowledge the issues MLS has competing with Mexico without it sounding like we're making excuses for these performances? Individually, these performances were terrible. Individually, LA should be good enough to keep Tijuana from scoring in the first minute. LA should be good enough to figure out how to get through when they themselves scored 2 goals. Sporting Kansas City, who at one point was going through on away goals because of a 2-1 deficit when Benny Feilhaber scored a very nice goal. They should be able to lock it down better. Marco Fabian was amazing, but Mishak Jerome was a disaster. 757, you're on the air. You're on the air. Who's this? Did I wait too long? Can you hear me? All right, call back. 347-756-6276 is the number if you want to jump in here. If you want to jump in, happy to do it. Being told I'm having some audio issues. I'll try to fix that. 757, you're on the air.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Who's this?
Okay. This is Tay.
What's up, man?
Yeah, basically, every year I watch CCL, and I know I'm going to be miserable afterwards. I'll keep doing it over and over, and sometimes I kind of hate myself for it, But I find like we lose to Mexico, I'm kind of used to it. I guess in the future, sometime in the future, hopefully they will change. But I was kind of the reason I was more sad is because like LA Galaxy, we have 2 USMNT, the first team guys there, and Kansas City we have 2 USMNT starting players there like Juicy and Beasler.
Mm-hmm.
And I watch them, and I see on the other side like a Marco Fabian going he's like all over Kansas City, and I see like Juicy and Beasler. And they're not quite up to it, so I don't know. I wish like,
look,
I don't mind like losing, but it's like I don't know.
You sound really, really depressed, Tay.
Yeah.
Look, this is a team game, okay? It is a team sport. It doesn't matter how good Landon Donovan is, or Robbie Keane is, or Omar Gonzalez is, or Graham Zusi is, or Matt Beasler is. Individually, if the rest of the team is terrible. Now, you need those. You want those guys to perform well. Don't get me wrong. And I saw a lot of criticism of Zusi last night. And Beasler certainly wasn't on top of his game and was responsible for some of those goals, or at least indirectly responsible. And certainly with LA, you can point to, Robbie Keane not being sharp. You can certainly say Landon Donovan may not have been his best. I thought he was okay, and I thought he was one of the better players LA had. But I also read something today by a writer who knows Landon Donovan very well, who said he thought Landon Donovan was walking that entire game, and he didn't understand that. So, I think in the aftermath of a loss, it's easy for us to pick out those moments and say, well, here's why. Look what's happening. Thanks for the call today. And again, there's no excuses in the game, in that moment. But I suppose that what we're talking about here is a difference between the big picture and these individual game situations. Now, I said it after the first legs that neither Sporting or LA did themselves any favors by failing to score a second goal. That if they had a second goal, it probably changes things a little bit. Now, in the end, it wouldn't have been enough to get them through because LA conceded, was it 4? And Sporting conceded 5. But who knows how those games would have been different if they had set up differently because those teams had 2-goal leads instead of 1-goal leads. I don't know. And I do think that one day, at some point, MLS will get over this hump. But I also don't think that it becomes an issue that should lead us to some wider criticism. Look, you can criticize MLS all you want. And you certainly can say they need to spend more money to be more competitive to improve the quality. And I put this to people. Do you want MLS to do everything they can to win the Champions League? Or should they be doing other things to improve the league, and then when that happens, the Champions League will come? I think that's the right attitude. 706, you're on the air.
Hey, Jason. It's Kevin Kincaid from PhiladelphiaUnion.com. How's it going?
Hey, what's up, Kevin?
Hey, so listen, a lot of stuff being thrown around on Twitter this morning, a lot of doomsday kind of stuff. The gap is so big.
Kevin, every year, Kevin.
Listen, okay, the Kansas City team, you made light of this earlier. Let's just go back to this. The Kansas City team that qualified for this tournament in 2012 by winning the U.S. Open Cup.
Yes.
On that team, they had Roger Espinoza, Kai Kamara, Aurelian Collin, Seth Sinovic, Chance Myers playing right back, and Jimmy Nielsen in goal. Okay, and none of those guys were playing last night.
True, but that happened to be the defending MLS Cup champions, so you expect them to represent well.
It's true, but I think the point is, they played 3, backup defenders last night. I know Ike Opara is a guy who does have experience, but he's not. Collin, Beasler, Sinovic, and Myers is their back 4. And that's the guys you expect to see down there. Mm-hmm. So essentially they're going with 3 backup defenders. San Jose, their back line didn't include a single starter. So I'm looking at 7 out of 8 guys playing defense last night who normally don't play defense.
True, but
I don't know what you can expect from if you're putting together this kind of lineup.
Well, look, fair enough, Kevin, and I agree with you. I mean, obviously, I picked out Jerome and I picked out Opara a little bit, and Ellis wasn't good either, and he's new on the scene. He's green in that regard. So, yeah, you can point to those things and say, well, look, that what would you expect of that team defense? But then you have to ask the question, why did Vermees put that team out? Why didn't Collins start? I understand Myers and Sinovic not available, but and maybe that does change. And then we get into the bigger picture, Kevin, of why MLS teams don't have capable backups who can handle that stuff. Maybe no one can handle Marco Fabian. I don't know. But there are certainly... You would certainly hope that an MLS team has a capable backup. They can stick it right back, who's not going to get torched repeatedly and not learn a lesson in how to deal with that.
Right, and then you say, look, if MLS doesn't have the depth it needs right now, then you go put another layer on that and say, what do we need to get to the depth that we have to raise the salary cap? You know? People are throwing out all these good ideas out there, but you have to take them sort of one layer at a time and explain why one thing fixes a certain problem and why the other thing fixes another problem. And you'll get there. I don't think the gap is as big as people are saying, but nothing great is ever said. The morning after a couple of bad losses from LA and Kansas City, but I think you play backups, and that's what you expect. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are so many variables at play. How much does Bruce Arena care about this tournament? I mean, he made a show of it this year. We know he's slagged off the U.S. Open Cup in the past. We know he's more of a league guy. That's fine. That's where his money is made. It's where his bread is buttered. And I don't really. It's his decision. It's frustrating in this competition, but if LA goes on to win the MLS Cup, then he's going to be justified in the way he treats these Cup tournaments.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just make one final point too, real quick. You watch the European Champions League, and you see a lot of teams that are very cautious. Especially on the road, 4-2-3-1, conservative formations. They went down there and KC tried playing 4-3-3 last night. Both the other teams played 4-4-2. So they weren't bottling it. They weren't trying to sit on a 1-goal lead. So, I don't know if that's a dumb idea or if you give them credit for going after it. But, it was definitely different than what we usually see.
You've actually pointed out a very good kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. If MLS teams go down to Mexico and park the bus and bunker in, they get criticized for that posture because first of all, it's sort of anti-football, blah, blah, blah. And second of all, it indicates, okay, look, we know we're not good enough to play with the Mexican teams, and there's criticism there. And you could argue that's what San Jose did. And yet here we are sort of lauding the effort of San Jose in a tie we didn't expect them to be competitive in. So that the bar is different for these teams. And I suppose that's part of it is we didn't expect much out of San Jose. They gave Toluca the toughest. I mean, they give a Mexican team the toughest run, while the teams that we thought were going to carry the banner in LA and Sporting fell flat on their faces in the second leg.
That's good stuff, Jason. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Appreciate that, Kevin. Kevin Kincaid from PhiladelphiaUnion.com. Good stuff there. Look, again, you are individually responsible for deciding how much you care about the Champions League in this part of the world. Okay? You are individually responsible for whether you believe MLS should be there or not. For me, I can see why they're not. That doesn't mean I'm not frustrated when the results come out the way they do. Doesn't mean I'm going to pull any punches about the way LA played or the way Sporting played or the fact that Shea Salinas missed a penalty. Not just on Shea Salinas, but John Bush had a couple of saves he could have made. So it doesn't mean I'm not frustrated by these individual results. It just means when I look around MLS, I look at where MLS is, 19 years in, 19th season this year. When I look at that, I'm still, I don't know, call me Pollyanna if you want, but I'm still sort of amazed by what's happened to this point. I'm still excited that we have a league that continues to grow. Yeah, there are things I disagree with, and I want the salary cap to be raised, and I think MLS should spend more on players, and I understand the frustrations that we have with some of the decisions that are made from the top. And when Garber says one of the best leagues in the world by 2022, it sounds like idiotic bluster based on last night's results. But I get why he says it, and I hope that he backs it up, because if he doesn't, he deserves everything he gets. Every criticism you could possibly fling at him. Don't say it if you're not going to back it up. So I get the frustration. But again, I'm sort of still amazed at where we are. I'm amazed that producer Vince's team spent $100 million on players this winter. Vince, what's up, man?
Oh, hey, Jason, man. I'm not looking at this from a Canadian perspective. I look at this from an MLS perspective, and it's frustrating at the end of the day. I mean, this has been a fantastic offseason for Major League Soccer. Returning stars, every team, strengthening themselves, and we got the genuine feeling of growth. Mm-hmm. Everything's growing, everything's getting better, and it is. Don't get me wrong, it is, but it's sobering. The fact that MLS got slapped in the face, and it's not even just slapped in the face. They got slapped in the face by Mexico. So,
again, Vince, but again, and I know you're Canadian, and maybe the psychology is a little bit different, but I imagine you feel the same way a lot of Americans do. Why is it? And look, I understand losing to your rival is always painful, but why is it that everything that involves Mexico creates this explosion of emo nonsense? I mean, look, Mexico has every reason to be light years ahead of the United States when it comes to culture, money, the number of kids they spit out, the type of players they can recruit, all of those things. Every reason to be light years ahead. And yes, I get it. It's frustrating. And I imagine that people are of the opinion that if MLS just took the handcuffs off everything would be level, and the United States would go, American teams would go into Mexico and win all the time, or Canadian teams would go into Mexico and win all the time. I don't know that that's true. I mean, I don't know that it's not true. I haven't seen any evidence of it because we haven't gotten there yet. And I'm not going to say it's wrong to want MLS to do that. I just think that in this moment, in this condition, to expect more out of MLS teams in this competition is sort of naive, is it not?
It is. You're right about it. MLS can't compete financially with Liga MX. Everybody knows that, and it doesn't do the league any favors that knockout round starts right when the season is starting. Of course, but just it's the way they play, Jason. It's just letting in goals in the first minute by the two teams who were favored to at least put in a good showing against their Mexican rivals, and then just to be deflated from then on. And then just to not perform, and then I personally believe guys like Bruce Arena, he doesn't care. It's about the MLS Cup for him, for old school guys like him. A guy like Peter Vermeer.
But is that wrong, Vince? Is it wrong? Why is that wrong?
No, it's absolutely not, because the league has conditioned these coaches and what they're getting paid for. It's not about the Champions League. It's not like Europe or South America where coaches are ranked more on what they can do in international competitions than at home. It's all about the domestic trophy in North America, in the United States and Canada specifically. It's all about what you can do within your league, and anything else is a bonus.
I think that there's an element of an American mentality there, and then sometimes a North American mentality. Sorry, Vince. And I think sometimes it is the default setting of soccer fans, particularly those of us who are in tune with Europe and pay attention to things like the Copa Libertadores or the Champions League in UEFA, to think of that as a wrong attitude, to make a value judgment on that attitude. Oh, look, all these teams care about is MLS Cup. Well, that's clearly the wrong way to go. You want the international accolades. And yeah, that'd be nice. Don't get me wrong. It'd be great for an MLS team to win the Champions League. I don't think it's some sort of gigantic tipping point that changes the future of MLS. I don't think it turns MLS into one of the most relevant leagues in this hemisphere, but it would be important in some way. It's just again, we are so frustrated by the results that it manifests itself as overvaluing everything that comes with this. I'm just saying, and I've ranted before about why it's wrong for U.S. soccer and American soccer and the culture to constantly judge itself by Mexico. And that's true in this sense as well. It's not that you want to get better so you can beat Mexican teams. It's that you want to get better, period. We want to get better because we want better soccer, because we want better players. And then and that will spread itself across the globe in whatever manner. It's what I'm saying is, don't put blinders on and think that MLS should do things directly to win the Champions League. MLS should do things to benefit the league, period. One of those things will be to spend more money on players. That's a given. Anything else, Vince? Sorry, man.
No, I understand where you're coming from, Jason. And I mean, the goal, of course, is to get better. Just get better, not get better to beat someone.
Right.
But you can't deny it has to be. There has to be at some point a goal where MLS teams have to be competitive enough where they're not, floundering against okay, all right, competition from other countries. Fair
enough. Again, I'm not sugarcoating the way that MLS failed last night. I'm not sugarcoating that. I think that sometimes we get too locked into the big picture and fail to appreciate the individual situations. And I'm not, again, MLS has failed again, period. And after so many years of doing this, so many years of seeing it, and all of the evidence that's at hand, there is a big picture lesson to be taken from it, that MLS teams aren't good enough to compete with Mexican teams in this competition. All right. I understand. And Trevor says, how do you actually gauge any progress otherwise? That's a fair point. I gauge progress by the people in the stands and by the television contracts and by the money coming into the league, because that's going to ultimately make the league better. But I suppose that all right, you can't do that to me, Trevor. I suppose that in order to sort of feel like we're making progress, you need to see these victories. Absolutely. I suppose what I'm trying to say, Vince, is we need to understand why we think this is important and recognize that there are different reasons for wanting to win for wanting to MLS to win this. And I will also point out that as MLS grows, we are being fractured more and more along team lines, as is natural. And honestly, why should a Red Bulls fan care if Sporting Kansas City wins in the Champions League? Why should a Seattle Sounders fan care if LA wins in the Champions League? Do they have any reason to, really?
Yeah, it represents Major League Soccer, Jason.
But why? Why is that a thing that we should do?
I understand with the English, it's a different mentality where it's my club and nobody else's. But I've talked to fans of the Portuguese teams, of the German teams. If it benefits the league as a whole, they're for it. I mean, yesterday on Reddit, there was a thing where LA fans were just like, I don't understand why I'm cheering these San Jose guys, but I am cheering them because I want MLS to be better. And this is the kind of competition that helps everybody as a whole. You can't go in with that mentality, Jason. My team only. You have to be, cheering on the entire league as a whole because your team is a part of that league.
Okay, but it doesn't have to be all for one. Is all I'm saying. I'm that guy. I'm a general fan of the league. I'm rooting for MLS teams against Mexican teams. I am. I'll admit to that. But for a fan who is a hardcore diehard of any particular team, I don't see why they would be. Why would they have to be invested? I really don't. I mean, I guess that if you are of the opinion that progress is the goal, then fine. I guess that's a reason to root for the league. But if you're a Sounders fan, shouldn't the thing you care about be winning as many trophies as your team can win? If your team's in the Champions League, of course you're rooting for them. But if your team's not, all you care about is MLS Cup and US Open Cup. And that's a fine attitude to have. That's a understandable attitude to have, right? And look, the bottom line here is, I'm gonna let you go, Vince. Appreciate the call, man. The bottom line for me, part of the problem here is, again, and I sort of outlined this. The excuses, some of them are legitimate. Some of them are real reasons MLS struggles in this competition. Or if we took Team A and Team B and ignored the league they came from, and we said one is in their first month of their season, and one has played 20 games in their current campaign and been together for that long, because again, remember, it's not just that MLS teams are in their first month, is that these are teams that have new players who are still working into the system, that are still trying to understand how to play with their teammates. If we took Team A and Team B and you said those, you would say, of course, Team B's got a massive advantage. And yet, because we are so on edge about comparing MLS to everything that we possibly can, and this is the only direct way we can do it against a better league, that kind of gets minimized. And the fact that these teams are different than the teams that actually qualified for the Champions. The fact that that MLS teams spend a fraction of what Mexican teams spend on their players. I suppose that we should be rooting that we're just rooting for upsets at all times, and you expect at least one. The fact that the scheduling issue is self-inflicted doesn't change the fact that it's an issue. I'm not saying that there's not fault to MLS for scheduling this way or being part of this competition when it's scheduled this way. It's still a fact that affects these teams. All right, let's take a break. We haven't even touched on Manchester United. Did I even mention them? When we come back, failed to mention this as well. Matt Yoder from Awful Announcing will join us, talk about the MLS TV deal. What's going on with that? Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Joining us now via telephone, editor over at awfulannouncing.com, Matt Yoder. He's a return guest. We had you on to talk about the behind-the-scenes stuff at the USA-Mexico game in Columbus, right?
That is right, Jason. And it's been a while, too long, in fact.
Yes, but we are still sort of always talking about USA-Mexico. I just got done with a big rant about the Champions League, Matt. And in order for MLS to catch up, blah, 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 part of the deal is going to be money. I mean, they need to bring in more revenue. You could argue that they should be spending more on players to begin with, but more revenue should lead to higher salary cap and more competition with those Mexican teams. And in order to get that revenue, the TV deal is going to be crucial. And you have a piece up at awfulannouncing.com that sort of wonders what's going on, because we heard, how long ago is it? Beginning of January, we heard rumors that there was a deal coming with ESPN and FOX, and it was going to be for $75 million. Where is everything right now?
Everything's in a bit of a standstill. And this is really the funny thing about the current MLS TV negotiations, because the first report came about in Sports Business Journal back in January that Fox and ESPN were going to come to a deal. I think it was 8 years, $80 million a year. February came along, and negotiations are still ongoing. And here we are in the middle of March. And I think people are beginning to wonder what's happening with these MLS TV negotiations, because there still hasn't been any official confirmation or deal that has been signed. And everything I've heard, Jason, is that a deal is largely agreed to, that it's in place, but there's still some give and take between these sides, and nothing has been signed yet. So a lot of people behind the scenes are wondering what is going to be the final details of this MLS TV contract, which network is going to get what games, and what actually is going to be the parameters of this new contract at the end of the day. I think there's still a lot of unknowns here as these two sides continue to negotiate.
Now, one of the things that you speculate about, and I imagine this is a sticking point, and certainly the MLS community rose up in disgust when Fox was mentioned as getting back into the MLS game, because no one wants to see these games on Fox Sports 2, where it's, generally speaking, only available in standard def. I think a couple of outlets have it in high def. It's hard to find. A lot of people don't even get it. Do you think that's the major sticking point, where Fox is going to put these games and MLS sort of fighting back against being relegated to a channel no one gets?
Definitely. And this is the most fascinating element in these negotiations, because on the one side, you have a league in Major League Soccer that doesn't get great ratings on national television. Let's be honest about that. So when you look at it as a property, ratings-wise, maybe it belongs on a Fox Sports 2 instead of a Fox Sports 1. It's not going to be a huge, huge draw for Fox Sports 1 or ESPN at this point. Does it have a lot of potential? Certainly. But right now, you can't stack those numbers up against some of the other properties that Fox Sports 1 and ESPN are going to have. So MLS, they definitely want that airtime on Fox Sports 1. They want that airtime on ESPN. They want as much premier time slots as they can get. But right now, at the same time, Fox is trying to build Fox Sports 2 into a viable option for sports leagues. And at this point, it's not there. You mentioned the standard def problem, the distribution. It's way, way behind Fox Sports 1. And I think Fox wants to see Fox Sports 2 as an equal to Fox Sports 1, just as MLS wants to see the value of their league increase. So you have these two competing interests here, with Fox trying to build up Fox Sports 2, MLS trying to get on the main channel of Fox Sports 1, and that's really creating this big impasse in these negotiations, because MLS doesn't want to be the flagship league of Fox Sports 2, because they know that'll send ratings continue to go downward. So that is really the major issue at this point, I think, and it'll be interesting to see if any or all or some of these games end up on Fox Sports 2. I think that's the major question right now.
We'll get to one of the other potential sticking points in a second, as Jonathan Chandenwald has chimed in on Twitter. But this specific issue, I mean, it's difficult for an ambitious league that believes it has a bright future and needs to build those television ratings to, to sort of quote unquote know its place when it comes to ratings. I can understand them wanting to push back, but I can also understand Fox's position that this is where you fit, really. And again, if you're going to grow, maybe help us grow this network. Now, let's just sort of put this out there to get it over with. despite the fact that we've had a delay, and as you said, perhaps the deal has already been agreed to, and it's a couple of sticking points. NBC is completely out and has not been back in since the initial rumors floated out there.
Yeah, NBC, if you talk to the people there, the network, I mean, they've already said their goodbyes to Major League Soccer. That's the attitude right now. They've issued a public statement to Jonathan Tannenwald way back in January when it was reported that Fox and ESPN were the contenders for this deal. So I don't think they're in the picture right now, and that really hurts, I think, MLS, because at this point now, if NBC can't compete on a financial level with the rights fees that Fox and ESPN are willing to offer, then there's not really a lot that MLS can do leverage-wise in these negotiations with Fox and ESPN. I think that's providing some difficulty here as well.
Now, the MLS package is paired with rights to U.S. national team qualifiers, and those are really the cherry games that both ESPN and Fox want to get because they're bigger ratings numbers, and that's a potential sticking point, as Jonathan Tannenwald has mentioned on Twitter. I imagine that as SUM, the group that represents the holds MLS rights, and I imagine is negotiating on their behalf, can sort of hold Fox over a barrel when it comes to those qualifiers, perhaps in return for getting moved to a better network. Is that possible, or is that kind of is that the wrong tactic for MLS and U.S. soccer to take?
It could be a card that's played in these negotiations, Jason, but again, you're looking at the split of the ESPN World Cup or the USA World Cup qualifying games. It's something that ESPN has had all the major rights to in the past. Well, now it looks like Fox is going to get some share of those games. Will that be a 50-50 split? Which networks gets USA Mexico? Is there a trade-off there with MLS Cup? I mean, these are all questions that need to be answered in this. And those World Cup games, those really are the crown jewel of this TV contract right now. Those are drawing the biggest numbers. Those are reaching the most viewers. And especially with Fox getting the World Cup contract here in 2015 with the Women's World Cup, they want those key U.S. international games. ESPN President John Skipper is a big supporter of international soccer. You see his value there. Even though they've lost the World Cup, they still have the European Championships, they've signed on with the Mexican national team, they're still going to want some of those U.S. qualifiers. So again, you have these two sides pushing and pulling. ESPN and Fox both want a share of those games, but it's a question of who is going to get what games and just how many.
Now, Garber has he was speaking at some conference recently, and in addition to addressing the World Cup in 2022, which will probably be a disaster, I saw something, and I don't have it in front of me, and I apologize, but I believe he mentioned some numbers, a percentage increase over previous contracts. And again, we're sort of eyeballing a 60, 65, 70, $75 million range, and you sort of outlined it. MLS may or may not deserve a contract that large based on the ratings they've delivered in the past. So why on earth would that contract be that valuable? Is it just about those national team games? Is there something else that will get these networks to pay out for a product that hasn't really shown much viewership?
It's all tied up in the booming industry of these live sports rights. Right now, live sports rights are one of the most valuable properties in television, because if you think about it, live sports are one of the last, if not the last, DVR-proof programming option that you can air on a network. So we've seen it all over sports. Leagues are doubling their rights fees, tripling their rights fees, and MLS, even though they've seen ratings fall in recent years, they're negotiating this contract at just the right time, because everyone's sports rights and the value tied into them are increasing. And even MLS, even though they haven't shown a strong presence on television, these networks know the value of the live sports rights, and that's what's going to drive a network like Fox Sports 1, who is really struggling to see some of their original programming get off the ground. So even though MLS may not bring in a ton of viewers, it's still going to be something that can help the network. So you're seeing these increases all over sports. And for Major League Soccer, it's so important, because if they can get, let's say, double the rights fees in this next TV deal, that may allow them to invest more capital in the league, invest more in players, and you can see a snowball effect where the league can jumpstart this growth process.
And we've seen soccer rights fees in the United States go up recently. Obviously, the big headline grabber is NBC and what they pay for the Premier League. But there's also, there's the no commercials element of those 45-minute blocks. And I know we get, the bug is sponsored by someone in the boards around the field. Whether or not those are in control of the networks, I don't know. Are advertising, but they still can't get the same sort of value for an MLS game or a soccer game that they would get out of a Major League Baseball game. How much of a factor is that in the rights fees that they get?
I think it definitely plays some factor, and I think that's why maybe the ceiling for MLS isn't as high as it could be. If you look at what Fox is trying to do in building a 24/7 cable network from scratch, you're going to see MLS as more of an auxiliary product rather than a pillar that you'd want to build around. I think that's part of the reason why NBC was not so eager to stay involved in these negotiations. They had a set value for MLS. They knew its place on their schedule with NHL, with EPL, with NASCAR coming in the fold next year. So they weren't comfortable with what MLS was asking for and the value that they were assigning to their rights fee. So I think it's a very interesting salient point that MLS does have a rising value, but it does have a cap to it just because it maybe can't attract those things that a Major League Baseball audience could or some of the other major sports leagues.
It's interesting. Jonathan Tannenwald again chiming in, a guy with his ear to the ground on these subjects as well. He's suggesting that the argument over the U.S. national team rights is more about Fox and ESPN slugging it out than anything to do with MLS at this point. That, and as you said, the framework of the deal is probably already done, and it's just a matter of who's going to get what games. And I hope that that involves a room and a locked door, and nobody can leave, and just get the damn thing done with, Matt.
Yeah, because it's taken so long, and it really reminds me, Jason, of what's happened on the local scene. I mean, I'm here in Columbus with the Columbus Crew, and they didn't reach a local TV deal, and it's probably the worst local TV deal in sports, but that's another story for another day, until 2 days before the season. So you're hoping at some point here in the next 2-3 months that MLS can come to an agreement with ESPN and Fox. It's a situation, I think, and I know it might be easy to get carried away because there's nothing signed or announced yet. Everyone that I've talked to believes a deal is going to get done. I mean, it's right at the finish line. It's just a matter of working out these details. But they are very important details because of the stakes here for MLS and where they are as a league, and for those U.S. qualifiers, for Fox's coverage for the World Cup, for ESPN trying to maintain a presence with the U.S. national team. They're details, but they're very important details for all of these partners involved.
Yeah, and there's, this is a domino in the next series of events for Major League Soccer. CBA negotiations are going to start heating up, or the talk about them heating up is going to start later this summer. And this is something that we sort of want to get out of the way so we can understand as outside observers, not being in that room, how much money MLS is actually bringing in, or try to approximate it in order to try to determine really what kind of leverage the players have. And I imagine that's kind of a weird situation for Garber and the league to be in. They want the big TV contract, but they also know that that's going to hurt them in their leverage when they go into that room with the players.
Yeah, it's such a big test because if you suddenly have a league that has double the revenue from television that they did, that's going to create a huge ripple effect throughout the league. And it's going to be, I really think, the biggest test for Don Garber and MLS is when this TV deal gets through. How exactly do they use that extra revenue? Will it be put towards maybe the final expansion teams? Will it be put towards player salaries, towards marketing the league? I mean, there's so many options on the table for the league. How do they move forward in this way? And how do they try and increase those ratings? Because the higher ratings they can get, the more they can charge networks in the next TV deal, and the more valuable those rights become. So that's why I think that if you look throughout the history of Major League Soccer, these are the most important negotiations that are going to take place from the TV side, because this deal can really set the framework and lay the foundation for the next 10 or 20 years of this league.
There you go. Matt Yoder, editor over at awfulannouncing.com, which has a brand new look. Go check it out. Thank you for your time and your insight, Matt. I appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, We've grabbed American soccer writer Brian Blickenstaff, who's based in Germany. We'll talk some Julian Green. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning with American Soccer Network, NASN.TV.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Back on Soccer Morning, we just happened to grab the last minute, and I appreciate him doing it. Brian Blickenstaff, soccer writer based in Germany. Hi, Brian.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. Now, we did a little bit of the Julian Green stuff yesterday. I mean, it was a big deal, and we talked to Brian Schroeder from Yanks Abroad. It was a very sort of let's pull back on the excitement kind of conversation. I want to have a different conversation with you. I mean, I think it's right to have some perspective about what Julian Green is right now. And while we're all excited about what he could be, there's a long way to go. But I think it's interesting to get the perspective of somebody who's inside Germany and sort of sees how this is being viewed. Even if it's not a big story, it's certainly got to be something to be talked about inside German soccer circles. Is there a sense that that Julian Green made the wrong decision? Is that any way to put it?
I think that there is a sense of that. First of all, it's not nearly as big a story here as it is in the United States,
absolutely.
which is clear. But I do think that there's some sense that he made the wrong decision. He's certainly a player that has all the tools to one day make it for the full national team here in Germany. And there's a lot of people that I guess are wondering why he didn't want to do that. I think that the German national team obviously gives the opportunity to win a World Cup, and the United States just isn't quite there yet.
Mm-hmm. Now okay. Go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say that he said that that Jurgen didn't guarantee him a spot in the World Cup, but that the possibility is definitely there, and as an 18-year-old, that was what swayed him basically. Now,
you mentioned something before we came on the air that this may have, yes, of course, the United States is not anywhere as close to winning a World Cup as Germany, and Germany's got the history, and Germany's got the pedigree. Germany will be a strong team in Brazil this summer. But does this have any impact on the way Germany or German football fans view American soccer? Because there are some distinct connections, and maybe we can talk about Steve Cherundolo, maybe not, but there are some distinct connections between the two countries on this level, and you just wonder what the view of American soccer actually is, especially as it relates to a player like Green choosing to play for the U.S.
Sure. As a guy who's American and who writes primarily about soccer, the question I feel the most from German people is, how good is the American national team, and how important is soccer in the United States? And I always tell people, that it's growing really quickly. And make a case that the U.S. is probably better than they realize as a soccer nation. But I think something like this where Klinsmann really put the full court press on bringing in an 18-year-old kid with very little first team experience, who's playing in the fourth division, I believe, right now, which is where the Bayern under 23 squad plays. It's a regional league. I think that doesn't really strengthen the case that at least I try and make to the German people. if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Obviously, it's a difficult question to answer. I mean, there are so many layers to it, and I think that the part of this is, obviously, the United States is a very large country, and anyway, what's the view of Klinsmann at this point? I mean, how do German fans feel about Klinsmann? He's clearly a legend. He's an amazing player for the national team, a legend, and a guy who, bad run at Bayern Munich, but still has a lot of credit in that country. How do they feel about what he's doing in the United States?
I think there's a certain amount of pride associated with his record as the coach of the United States. I mean, I think there's a certain feeling that he's incorporating or bringing sort of the German brand to the United States, and people like that, they see that as a good thing. But I don't know. I mean, he has a reputation for being really hard-headed and for going. When he sees something he wants, he goes for it with everything in him. And in today's Süddeutsche Zeitung, it's sort of the equivalent of the New York Times. There's a little article about Julian Green and Klinsmann, and that's what they said. He had his eye on Green, and he pursued him with everything he had. And I think the Germans are a little bit upset. They feel like maybe it's a little bit unfair to go after kids that are so young and we don't know exactly. We can't predict the future, so we don't know what their potential really is. So I think there's a little bit of sense that maybe it's too young for this to be happening.
That's interesting. I mean, look, this is going to continue to happen. Not only are there strong footballing ties between the two countries, there's a history there. There are clearly many Americans who have spent time in Germany, and that's what's leading us to these dual nationals having a choice of who they're going to play for. So I guess in the future, is there going to be a whether or not it's about a phenom or the kid is being hyped up in specific terms? Do you think there's going to be sort of a pushback for Germany to maybe lean on these kids a little heavier in the future? I mean, okay, maybe John Brooks wasn't ever going to be a star for Germany, and maybe Julian Green wasn't ever going to be a star for Germany, but there still has to be sense of, well, they should have loyalty to the country that they call home and where they learn their football.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a little bit of this definitely opened some eyes, I would say. And actually, at the end of this Süddeutsche Zeitung article, the writer put in a little paragraph about Gideon Zelalem.
Yes.
The player at Arsenal saying, we got to be careful because when Klinsmann sees something he wants, he goes out and gets it. Yeah. And I thought that was pretty interesting.
That is interesting that they bring up Gideon Zelalem because he's a kid who learned a lot of his. I mean, he was in Germany before, but he learned a lot of his soccer here, playing in the suburbs of DC. But he's not a citizen, and he's not eligible for the U.S. right now.
Yeah, they don't put that in the article.
And, I think that's interesting, and I'm fascinated by these questions of nationality and where royalties are supposed to lie. And one of the things that came out here in the aftermath of Green's decision was Alexi Lalas, who has every right to talk about what it means to wear the colors of the United States and represent your country, sort of talking about commitment and wanting to be there and wanting to represent your country. And sort of, while he didn't say he didn't like Julian Green deciding to play for the U.S., he certainly indicated that this mercenary feeling that's happening could be a problem. And he kind of couched it in practical terms of how good the team can be. But I think there are some questions, and it's going to hit Germany, and it's going to hit many other countries. We're watching what England's doing with Januzaj right now. There are questions over who belongs to who. Well, now, while I always say that it's up to those individual players, there's a belief that there's a cynicism involved. I mean, clearly we saw it with Aaron Johansson when the Iceland FA threw a hissy fit over his decision to play for the U.S., And I guess really, I don't know that I have a question. It's just an observation. Germany dealing with those issues, and I know they've done it. They've had to deal with them with people like Ozil.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're only going to see more of that as time moves forward. And I think there's plenty of young kids out there that are still eligible for both countries that this hasn't even. We're not even just with the United States, but I mean, there's plenty of countries that Germany. Is developed that are developing in the German system who have dual nationality,
right?
And so this is something that's not going away.
And I think it's fascinating when we get like the Boateng brothers playing for different countries, and again, it's only going to quote unquote get worse. What I mean is only going to happen more regularly. And I guess maybe what I'm asking is, and of course there's a great imagine there's a lot of German pride for their national team, and they are hopeful about the World Cup and moving forward. They'll want to win everything they possibly can. Sure. But at some point, is there a question about the validity of international football to begin with?
I don't think it's quite gotten to that point.
Okay. Well, I mean, from your perspective, I mean, just give me your opinion on that.
My opinion, yeah.
Do you have one?
No, man. This has been going on for a while, though, right?
It has, but I think it's because maybe these issues are more high profile, and because we're doing this thing now, Brian, where instead of just a player shows up in a national team, he may be dual international, but he makes the decision. Oh, look, we're going to cap so and so. Now it's he's 17, and we're going to recruit him, and he playing with this youth team, and then that youth team, and then the other youth team. I mean, I think there's at least
there's a certain strategy that's going into it now, right? Like, they're courting players that ordinarily wouldn't have a sniff of the national team. I don't know if it changes the validity of the international tournaments. I don't know. I mean, I don't think that's really quite fair to say. I know that's not necessarily what you're saying, but it's not up to FIFA to determine who has what passport. And I think if you have the passport, then you have the you have the right. And I understand what Alexi Lalas is saying, and sure, maybe there's people, you hate to think that a guy is or that people are picking a team not because they care, but just because they want a chance to play in the World Cup. But I don't know if that necessarily makes if players are doing that, does that necessarily make them want to try less when they actually get to the World Cup?
It's a good question.
I mean, we have to assume that they're professionals, and that whatever jersey they put on, they're going to play hard and give it their all.
Yeah, I suppose it's the same sort of questions that come up when we're talking about big time college sports here, and whether or not these sports are sort of meeting the original spirit of collegiate sports. And in a lot of ways they're not. And they've been professionalized. And even though the players aren't getting paid, essentially they're mercenaries. And look at what Kentucky does with their basketball team every single year. You wonder if those things are creeping in. I think they're already there. And it's a runaway freight train. You can't stop it. And I can't imagine that international soccer is going anywhere. That's sort of not the point. I'm not saying let's end this. I'm just wondering that if we sort of get detached from the original idea, which was these are people who represent our country in every way possible. And while it's fair for Jermaine Jones and Julian Green and John Anthony Brooks and Danny Williams and all these guys to represent the United States in almost every other way, they're not American soccer players, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, I mean, they weren't trained in the United States. So.
That's what I'm saying is how much pride. I keep bringing this up, and it makes me sound xenophobic, and it's not that at all. But how much pride are we supposed to have in a team if 7 or 8 of our starters were taught their soccer somewhere else?
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, it's good. It's big questions, and Julian,
it's a big question
for the time. But at the same time, because the United States is a developing soccer nation, I am absolutely fine with making the national team as good as possible. And if that means Julian Green, that's great. So that there is progress made in sort of the enthusiasm behind a better team. If you know what I mean, the ends justify the means. The ends justify the means. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. If you're making a bet, do you bet on Green playing or going with the U.S. to the World Cup or not?
Yes. Yeah, I'm betting he goes. That's the guy. That's the feeling I'm getting. Brian Blickenstaff. Go find him on Twitter. BK Blick is his handle. He writes on soccer all the time.
Can I plug my column really quick?
Do it. Go.
Okay. I read a regular column about German sports and culture at beaconreader.com, and you can check it out there and subscribe to me there.
There you go. Brian Blickenstaff. Appreciate the time, Brian.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Andy Edwards out in Kansas City. What happened? Sporting. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Joining us now on the telephone from beautiful Kansas City. You live in Kansas or Missouri, Andy? Andy? Did I lose you?
You there?
There you are. Do you live in Kansas or Missouri?
Hey, Kansas.
You live in Kansas. All right. Because I was going to say beautiful Kansas City, and then I stopped at the state because I wasn't sure which part of Kansas City you live in. You were in Kansas City, Kansas, which is where Sporting plays. So that's good stuff. Anyway, Sporting Kansas City out of the Champions League last night, 5-1, get beaten by Cruz Azul in that second leg. It was going to be tough. We always knew it was going to be tough, Andy. Altitude, best team in Mexico, insane attacking ability. Sporting was going to have to hold on for dear life. They didn't even manage to do that. What went wrong?
Well, there's an entire list of things that you could say went wrong. The one that I think probably could have been affected by Sporting Kansas City and Peter Vermees was the lineup choice, the choice not to go with Aurelian Cullen. I'm sure we'll get to that in depth in just a little bit. But everything that you mentioned there with Cruz Azul being the best team in Mexico at the moment, having the kind of firepower that they do going forward, whereas Sporting Kansas City, we know Claudio Bielsa is a pretty good center forward. He disappears from time to time. We know Graham Zusi's a pretty good playmaker. He disappears from time to time. Benny Feilhaber, the exact same story. And so these are players that on their day are maybe close to as good as what Cruz Azul have, but consistently probably still not there. And that's ultimately what's going to be the gap in the quality for the two teams. But also at the same time, let's keep in mind, until a 15-minute period in the second half where Cruz Azul just bum-rushed Sporting Kansas City, they were going through to the semifinals. They had found the goal just before halftime through Benny Feilhaber, and they had themselves in a situation where through away goals, they would have advanced. Now they get bum-rushed, as I said, for 15 minutes, 3 goals in the second half, and it's completely over, and it looks really, really bad on paper. But still, for 135 minutes of the 180-minute series, they were going through for most of it. They were right on par with Cruz Azul. It just comes down to that last little bit that you can tell the top team in MLS still not quite to where the top teams in Mexico are. You can put it down to the money situation. You can put it down to a whole host of things. But they were close, and I give them a lot of credit for how long they kept this series close.
Yeah, we are left with pulling out these silver linings, these small victories, and I suppose that's one of them, and it's valid to a point. I mean, ultimately, 5-1, as you said, looks terrible on paper. There were questions. You mentioned the decision not to play Colin. There were questions all along the back line for Sporting last night. And again, Mishak Jerome was an absolute disaster. Now, he was going up against a brilliant offensive player, attacking player in Malcolm Fabian, but it was clear, and whether you want to pick on Jerome or not, it was clear that part of that gap is also about the depth between a player like Seth or like Chance Myers or Seth Senovich and Mishak Jerome.
Yeah, that's a horrible position, 2 horrible positions, I guess, to really lose your top guy going into a big game like this. How many good fullbacks are there in Major League Soccer? Sporting Kansas City happen to have 2 of them, and they're very, very lucky to have those 2 guys that they do. The difference from the starters to the backups for Sporting Kansas City is pretty similar to what it is for most other teams around MLS. Mishak Jerome, against an average run-of-the-mill MLS team, I think he's just fine. He can get by without looking too terrible. But as you said, when you go up against a player like Marco Fabian and they make a concerted effort, we're going to attack you down the left side every single time we get the ball. You're going to be exposed, and he was. Also, it's a tough situation for him coming into the game. Just 30 minutes into it, Josh Gardner is having to leave the game. Vesinovic not being on the left side, so Gardner over there, switching Ellis over there. So it was.
I seem to have lost you for a second there, Andy. All right, we'll see if we can get Andy back. The call is still going. We just have lost audio for whatever reason. Andy, are you there?
You there?
Okay, we got you back. It's like you dove underwater and now you're back. So there you go.
All right. Well, anyway, I think the problem with the back line last night was just the continuity. That group of 4 players had never played together. The group of 5 players that ultimately ended up playing together as well. And then you leave out Aurelian Cullen, who's arguably your biggest impactor of the game from the back line. and it's not a surprise that they gave up 5 goals.
Now, why did Colin not play? Wasn't he in that game to start with, especially when you figure maybe setting a tone the way he is capable of doing, the way he likes to do, could be a factor in that game?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I thought going into the game that I expected to see a pairing of Aurelian Collin and Iko Parra, not the other way around. Look, I think what it probably was for Vermes is Opara played pretty much all of the Champions League games last year. He played the first one this year, and that's a competition that he's decided that he's going to give him minutes, and he trusts him with that competition. Opara was a very, very good player in 2013. I was hugely impressed with how well he just kind of slotted into that back line for Sporting whenever asked. But that's not going up against this kind of team that the Cruz Azul is. For me, Colin doesn't allow the first goal. Is responsible for that. He gets caught in no man's land. The ball played to the top of the box. Doesn't even make a challenge on it. The third goal for Cruz Azul, I think it was, the one where Iko Parra gets beat to the near post and just falls over. Erling Collin doesn't get beat for that one either. There's something to be said of playing your absolute best players in this competition, whether you have other kind of motives of I want to get this guy minutes, I want to see how this guy reacts to the situation. Fact of the matter is, Aurelian Collin is probably your best defender overall.
There you go again. Just dove. We just lost you again. Ed?
Outside right now.
Okay. Yeah, it's going in and out. It's okay. We're hanging on. We're getting some good stuff here. Look, you mentioned there's something to be said for playing your best lineup in this competition, and it's pretty clear that if MLS teams are going to win this at this point in history, before we get any sort of major increase in the salary cap, they're going to have to play their best players. But these coaches are loath to give up too many points in the league, and considering it's still early in the season and not everyone has their legs yet, I just wonder if that's something that any coach is going to be able to risk.
Yeah, I think Sporting Kansas City, to a certain extent, did that in the first 2 weeks of the season. They sat 5 guys in Seattle for the opener. They sat 4 guys last weekend in the home opener against Dallas, and they dropped 5 points in those 2 games. And so I said last night on our post-game show immediately after the game, I give Peter Vermes and the staff a lot of credit. They did make Champions League a huge priority this season, and they didn't just say that. They walked the walk as well by doing what they did in MLS play. They realized that you can't be knocked out of the playoffs after 2 games. It's a 34-game season, but you can surely be knocked out of Champions League after 2 games when it's only a 2-game series. And so they put everything that they had into making that run, hoping to try and win it. Obviously didn't work out. And there was one questionable decision that they made in the series, and that's Colin last night, and I think that ultimately ended up costing them big time. Mm-hmm. But a center back is probably not going to swing a game 4 goals one direction or the other. I know he can score some goals himself, but the 5-1 scoreline still, that's a huge gap, and I don't think one player makes up for that.
It was we said it after the first leg. The cushions just weren't large enough, and Sporting came out of that game getting a little bit of praise from the Cruz Azul camp, and that was very nice. And yes, they won that game, and they played toe-to-toe with the Mexican leaders, but ultimately they only scored once. And clearly it's going to take more than one goal at home to win these series against these Mexican teams. How much of a regret is there over that first leg now that the Champions League campaign is over?
Yeah, that's one of the big talking points we had last night as well. Is for as well as Sporting Kansas City played in the first leg, and I thought they did play well. It was a very entertaining game. They still only had a slim 1-0 lead, and I think that goes back to talking about the difference in quality between the teams in the leagues at the moment. There's still quite a bit of a gap, and to have to play almost a perfect game like they did last Wednesday night at Sporting Park, just to have a slim lead, just to have a slight chance in the second leg, again, it says a whole lot about it. I don't know what they could have done differently in that first leg, though. Honestly, they played Claudio Bielsa for 88 minutes. He put in a great shift. Graham Zusi was in there. Everybody was in there. Yeah. Cruz Azul, just a really, really good team, not just going forward, but defending as well. And so next time around, look, they get to do it again. They get to do Champions League again in August. They're the only one of the three teams that were in the knockout round this year that have it for 14 and 15. So they'll get another crack at it soon. They don't have to wait another 12 or 18 months to get back in it. I'm sure they learned quite a bit. I'm sure Peter Vermees learned quite a bit. Maybe we'll be a little bit more gung-ho and throw caution to the wind in that first leg, knowing that if you don't build a bigger lead, it doesn't matter if you hold on to a slim 1-0 lead late in the first leg. You're probably going out either way.
Yeah, you got to win the group too. You mentioned that they're in the Champions League again starting in August in the group stage for 2014-2015. I think people may have forgotten because Sporting won the MLS Cup last season. People may have forgotten how they actually got into this tournament in this particular instance. This is from the U.S. Open Cup win, August 8th of 2012. Yep. They have now been eliminated 588 days after they qualified for the tournament. I mean, that's insane. Just from, again, look, it's difficult for MLS teams to compete against a well-oiled Mexican machine at this point in their season. That's a factor. But it's also ridiculous that CONCACAF does this tournament over this course of time in this manner. Do you have any beef with the way that this thing is handled, considering, and I look, scheduling on MLS's part plays a factor, but is there any beef with the way that CONCACAF does this?
Well, I think it would help out a lot if, say, all of the leagues from CONCACAF were to have the same sort of schedule, whether that's MLS. I'm not for MLS playing through the winter. I tweeted a picture a month or so ago of what would have been a game, I think it was the first week of March, where we had 5 inches of snow on the ground here in Kansas City. So I'm not for it. But if we had everybody on the same schedule, I think it would be much easier to kind of to close that gap and not have almost 600 days between when you're qualifying and when you're being eliminated in the tournament. You can finish, say we get Mexico to play from early in the year to late in the year like MLS does. Then we have a situation where Champions League, the group stage, can start in, say, March or April, and we can finish it up in September or October as both leagues are getting close to the conclusion of their domestic seasons. I think that's probably the most realistic way. Otherwise, what other options are there for Champions League? It's not a huge tournament yet. It's not drawing ratings and television money like we see over in Europe. And so there's not a huge incentive, I think, to really change it around for them at the moment.
Well, I think that incentive is an interesting question, but you could argue that there might be a better format. I don't have one in mind. I know that this is, everybody wants their Champions League to be like the UEFA version. And so we've got to have group stage, we've got to have the knockout rounds and all of these things. But considering where CONCACAF is and considering the drop from the top 2 leagues, 3 leagues, if you can include maybe a couple teams from Costa Rica and Honduras, down to the rest of CONCACAF, maybe it would be better to treat it as a seeded knockout tournament that's handled over a couple of months directly rather than even bother with the group stage.
Yeah, I think also that they've gotten a little closer towards that. If you look at the recent changes where they went to the 8 groups of 3.
What's the station again, Andy? I'm sorry.
Sports Radio 810.
There you go, Andy, with that killer voice, doing Sporting Kansas City post-game shows until the wee hours in the aftermath of the CONCACAF Champions League loss. I appreciate the time, Andy. Thanks a lot, man.
All right, thanks for having me on, Jason.
There you go. There goes Andy Edwards. We're getting ready to close this one down. Last 15 minutes of this show. 347-756-6276 is our phone number because we are a call-in program. That's part of what we do. It doesn't have to be about the CONCACAF Champions League. Let me spend a little time on what Manchester United was able to do yesterday against Olympiacos at Old Trafford. Robin Van Persie goes off. They win 3-2 on aggregate over the Greek leaders. And suddenly now are we going to say that David Moyes deserves more time, that he's got the right attitude, that he's doing the right things? How much of that do you put on the players, sort of taking that tie by the scruff of the neck and saying, we're not going to lose? And how much do you put on David Moyes? Is he suddenly a master motivator? Probably not. And this probably doesn't mean a lot for him in the long term. Now, it may keep the board from deciding to dismiss him now, which would certainly upset the season. And as you're still in the Champions League, why mess with that? I mean, we know that Manchester United is what they are in the league. The only question now is whether they can maintain a Europa League spot, because it doesn't seem like a challenge for the top four is in the cards. But you still have this Champions League campaign going on. So why mess with that? Why completely overturn the boat? It's already rocking, but why overturn the boat when you've gotten past this point? Now, I imagine that their draw is going to be insane in the next round. In the quarterfinal, the quarterfinal draw is going to be insane for Manchester United, because all 8 teams that have made the quarterfinals in the Champions League this year are damn good teams. Very difficult outs. Manchester United is not themselves. They're not the Manchester United of the past. We'll see if they can even scratch and claw, perhaps to give a run to whoever they draw. But again, that doesn't mean you should change the manager right now just because we had some doubts. And that doesn't mean that David Moyes deserves the job, deserves to stay in the job either. I think at this point, he should probably go, because this is not Fergie Part 2. There's so much angst over where Manchester United is heading. You can't really afford, especially as our friend Musa said, the business element of this. There's a stock price to consider. Think about that. Guys, gentlemen, should we fire David Moyes? Anybody have an opinion? Well, our stock price went down 12% yesterday. So clearly we should fire him. That's mind-boggling stuff. Insane stuff. And it illustrates the point that Manchester United is both this international behemoth of a business and the People's Club of Manchester still. And also the People's Club of London, maybe. 419, you're on the air.
Hey, what's up, Jason? This is Nick from Toledo.
Hey, Nick, what's up, buddy?
Got a call in about my United boys yesterday.
Okay.
I didn't think they were going to pull it out, man. Two-goal deficit. That was pretty insane. As far as Moyes goes, the jury's still out on him. I don't think one game makes or breaks what he's doing. Instead of Moyes out, maybe it's Moyes maybe at this point. But, we saw a couple years ago, Chelsea won the Champions League without having a pretty good Premier League season.
Right.
And so, who knows what happens. And then, of course, we all know what happened with Chelsea. They fired Roberto Di Matteo a couple weeks into the season after he won the Champions League. So, who knows what's going on. As long as they keep winning, I guess that's really all United fans want. Well,
I mean, is that in the cards, really? I mean, I guess that's the question here. And again, as I said, their quarterfinal draw is going to be tough. There's just no way around that.
No, everybody that's left in the Champions League is going to be a tough task, no matter who you play. So, but it's a 2-game series, so anything can happen over those 2 legs. We've seen it in the past where teams that probably shouldn't have made it through the leg, they end up coming back. I mean, nobody thought United could come back from 2 down just yesterday. So look, I'm just happy that they advanced. And if they win and progress, that's great.
Have you adjusted your expectations? I mean, you can't expect Champions League football next year. So where and whatever the season brings, it's unlikely to be anything that's going to make Manchester United fans happy. So do you adjust your expectations for next year, or does it immediately become whatever happens with the managerial situation, we should be challenging for a title in 2014, 2015?
If David Moyes is still the manager next season, I still think the expectations are that Manchester United should be challenging for the Premier League title, should be challenging for Champions League trophies. I mean, that's the expectations. That's not going to change no matter who the manager is.
All right. Appreciate the call, Nick.
Thanks, Jason.
All right. Let's move on a little bit here. Sort of round up what's happening in this Qatari bribery scandal. I don't even think the word scandal applies to Jack Warner anymore. I don't think a scandal doesn't work. Everything he touches is a scandal. If you're all scandal, the word loses meaning. You can't have a scandal if your entire life is one. We need something else. Super scandal, uber scandal. I don't know. Whatever you want to say about it. Jack Warner, no surprise, he's involved in this. He's denied he did anything wrong because that's what Jack does. He's called this a witch hunt. Meanwhile, in England, in Britain, a couple of MPs, members of parliament, have have called for FIFA to launch an inquiry into the revelations that there's bribery in relation to the Qatari World Cup bid. John Whittingdale, very nice, said that payments provide further evidence that casts doubts over the credibility of the entire process to select Qatar as the country to host the World Cup in 2022. It's calling for an investigation because of the bribery. The Qataris are denying wrongdoing on their end. And as I told you the other day, when this news broke, this amount of money, the amount of money that's being mentioned here, does not seem like enough. $2 million doesn't seem like enough. Jack Warner still voted for the United States. Did he help the Qataris? Did he help bin Hammam? That's what he got busted for in the end. That's what ended his FIFA tenure. He's getting busted for helping bin Hammam try to get votes to challenge that bladder. So he may have done something. He may have enabled some Qatari bribery. But this, I still don't know that this is directly related to any sort of vote buying. Now, it's a clear sign of corruption. I'm sure it's happened all the time. But I think the issue here is that we're calling for Qatar to lose the World Cup for all the wrong reasons. Who cares about $2 million being passed between one rich man and one corrupt rich man? One corrupt rich man to another. I mean, yeah, I suppose it's really bad. Really, really bad. FIFA's got scandal and money's being passed. How about the people that are dying in Qatar? How about that? How about that would be what we focus on when we say, hey, maybe they shouldn't host the World Cup? You know, not only is it hot, not only are we going to have to flip the schedule, maybe, possibly. What does Platini say today? Not only is there bribery and scandal and corruption, not only did bin Hammam get kicked out of FIFA, stripped of the AFC presidency, not only is Jack Warner just the worst guy ever, but people are dying to build the stadiums and the hotels and the buildings that are supposed to allow Qatar to host this tournament in something approaching a decent manner. And to this point, in walks Don Garber to this situation. Don Garber, speaking at that conference I mentioned where he talked about the TV contract, also spoke about Qatar. Said it's going to be a monumental disaster. Not going out on a limb there, Don, but appreciate it. Appreciate you jumping in, giving your piece. The problem here is that as Americans, to be careful with why we're concerned about the Qatari World Cup. Are you concerned about the Qatari World Cup because people are dying, as you should be, or are you concerned because, oh, look, maybe the United States gets it? That shouldn't be the reason. You shouldn't be wearing your bias that bluntly. If you hope for the World Cup to end up here, if it gets taken away from Qatar, I have no problem with that. Of course, we all hope for that. But that shouldn't be the reason that you're angry about this. Neither should bribery between two FIFA figures who have been known, I don't know, what's the word? Scalawags? Terrible word. Nor should that be the reason to call for Qatar to lose the World Cup. The reason to call for Qatar to lose the World Cup is all of that stuff that we talked to James Montague about. And all of those workers from Nepal who are going to Qatar, getting their contracts changed, not getting paid, living in squalor, living in filth, and dying. Dying. People are dying. Yeah, I know someone got killed in building the stadiums in Brazil. Construction sites are inherently dangerous places. But we're not talking about one or two isolated incidents. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people. Hundreds of people are dying so that Qatar, a nation so small, it has to build everything in order to host this tournament. People are dying to do that. One on Twitter. Honest question. Are people actually thinking about going to Russia and Qatar? In terms of the fans, I don't know. It's a good question. Are you considering it? Are you rushing to Brazil because, hey, I don't want to go to Russia. I don't want to go to Qatar. And look, it's easy to throw stones, and I don't want to make it out to be that we live in utopia here in the United States. But there's nothing wrong with pointing out the issues that are happening there and in Russia. the rampant racism that is a problem in Russia. The homophobia that is a problem in Russia. How are people supposed to go or want to go? Forget whether or not they would be actually accosted or treated poorly or attacked or called names or whatever when they get there. I think the evidence is that something's going to happen. Forget that fact, though. Why would anybody want to go based on what everything that you hear? Is it because, wait, hold on. Is the media twisting the message that much? I mean, twisting the information that much? Everything we built up with for the Sochi Olympics, that was all nonsense. That was all a lie. They didn't pass laws, anti-gay laws. Of course they did. And then when we come to Qatar, again, less about the corruption, less about buying. People buy votes. Told you, if the United States did not want to play dirty, they shouldn't have even gotten to the game, because that's how that game is played right now. The issue here, as we consider some sort of uproar, something that's actually going to make FIFA act over Qatar, is not they bought their votes. It's not it's hot there. It's not that they have their own anti-gay laws and homophobia. It's that people are dying to build the stuff. All right. Please go to iTunes, give us a rating and a review. I appreciate that. Thank you very much to our guests today, Andy Edwards, Brian Blickenstaff, Matt Yoder. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow. What's tomorrow? Friday. And the Classico coming up this weekend, right? See ya. Bye.